So, welcome inside Golden One Center and what has been an extremely eventful and busy day. We have both been here since around 8:30 this morning, covering everything that went on. First of all, let me introduce myself. I am Kevin John, joined by Matt George. You hear him on Locked On. He's also a sports anchor for ABC 10. Thank you so much for joining us. So Matt, I'm just going to start off early in the morning. We started the day off with a Monty McNair press conference at 9:30 this morning. And keep in mind, guys, this was the first time that Monty had spoken to the media since Mike Brown was fired. Keep in mind, Mike Brown was fired back in December. We're in February right now. So I'm not quick in math, but I think it's been around 40 days or so. So this was the first time that the media was able to speak with him, ask him questions, not just about Mike Brown's firing, but the De'Aaron Fox trade. So he answered our questions. A lot of people were interested what happened with Mike Brown. That seemed like that was the first topic of interest just because it's been so long since we've spoken to him. And Matt, from what I gathered from what he said about Mike Brown was that essentially their patience kind of grew small. He specifically referenced that 5-game losing skid, the Detroit Pistons game that they lost here, and it just didn't seem like they were headed in the right direction, and Monty felt he had to make that move.
Yeah, today was a day of Monty McNair facing the music, right? This should have happened weeks ago, over a month ago. This press conference should have happened, and the fact that it took this long, I think, unfortunately made Monty's job tougher today. He had to face these questions. I think this is also why we saw the Sacramento Kings split these press conferences apart, so Monty could answer and speak on what he needed to speak on, and then we could get to Zach LaVine and the new era of Kings basketball here. But when talking about Mike Brown, look, Monty didn't say a whole lot. Everything that he said, I pretty much already knew, or we could pretty much guess, especially when it comes to Mike Brown. It's easiest to get rid of a head coach when things aren't going well versus change your roster, which needed to happen, or even change your front office, which may still happen depending upon how the rest of this season goes. I wasn't expecting a ton from Monty McNair. I was a little disappointed, me personally, that Monty didn't address the way that it happened. I thought it was very disrespectful that the Sacramento Kings fired Mike Brown after having him not just run a practice, not just speak to the media. They fired him over the phone while he was driving to the airport to get on the team plane to go to Los Angeles. So the way that they fired Mike Brown was never addressed or owned up to by Monty McNair. But I will say this, both with Mike Brown, his comments on Mike Brown, and commenting on the De'Aaron Fox trade, now that he's addressed it, now that he's faced the music, now that he's answered or at least faced the tough questions, now there's that sense of closure. Now you can move on, right? Even if people like myself, people like you, we don't believe Mike Brown deserved to be fired. I still don't think it's the best move for this organization going forward. That being said, it's done with, and we now have the press conference to put the final bow on it. We have the comments, we have the reasoning, whether we agree with it or not. Now it's time to move on and move forward, and that starts tonight with the Kings and the Orlando Magic.
Absolutely, and I think in your words, with him facing the music, a lot of people had questions, and whether or not you feel that McNair elaborated in his answers or just kind of gave short answers, he faced the music. He didn't face the symphony, but he faced the music. We'll say that much. With that being said, just one thing I want to reference real quick from that the Monty McNair press conference was also De'Aaron Fox and that trade. And he kind of said in his words exactly was that he did not see a path forward for De'Aaron Fox to be here. He said that multiple times De'Aaron Fox did not sign extension. Now, we all know it. That was public. We know during the summer he had an opportunity to sign an extension. And one can say that he did not sign it for financial incentive if he were to make an All-NBA team and be eligible for a Supermax contract. But he made it very clear that they presented opportunities, options, contracts for De'Aaron Fox to stay with his team, and De'Aaron Fox or his camp did not decide to do that. So he said there was no path forward that they saw for De'Aaron Fox to be here. Personally, Matt, I kind of think that the whole De'Aaron Fox thing was kind of, the writing was on the wall, I think, a while ago. I don't think that this is something that just happened or culminated over the last few weeks. I think this was something that honestly went back to the summer. And then obviously when Mike Brown got fired, that obviously did not help De'Aaron Fox. But to Monty's credit, he did address somewhat what went into De'Aaron Fox trade. And at this point, he just didn't see a path here forward, and he feels that this team is better now with what they were able to trade and get around.
Yeah, there's two things from Monty speaking on De'Aaron Fox that I took issue with, but what you just laid out was not one of them. I do believe both sides got to a point where they knew a separation was in order. But two things Monty said at two separate times. The first one was he kind of put the onus on De'Aaron Fox. And he said, I mean, we publicly offered De'Aaron multiple contract extensions, and he chose not to sign them. Context is important to that, and I know Monty McNair is smart enough to understand this. If De'Aaron were to have accepted those contract extensions, one of them this past offseason, and then the first one even further before that, he would have willingly walked away from a chance to make almost or over $100 million more. It is very common for stars to the level of De'Aaron Fox, who are maximum contract players, to wait for the most that they can possibly get, turn down the initial offers so that they could potentially be able to get that Supermax contract, which Fox would have gotten had he made All-NBA this season. I think it's pretty clear that was not going to happen, which probably was the final straw in Fox ultimately deciding it was best for him to move on to head to San Antonio. So that was the first thing that I had issue with. The other thing that I had issue with was I asked Monty about, like, with everything that had gone so public and with Rich Paul, De'Aaron's agent, making it known that San Antonio is where Fox wanted to go, how did that affect and impact negotiations, right? It was very clear that the San Antonio Spurs were lowballing and giving the Kings a lot of take-it-or-leave-it type offers. Essentially what Monty said was we weren't going to accept anything less than what we wanted. That's just not true, because they did accept less than what they wanted. I mean, they did get Zach LaVine, who I know they wanted, and they're very happy with the return of Zach LaVine. They had to go and get the Chicago Bulls involved to make that happen. But the assets that they got from the San Antonio Spurs specifically, they didn't get any of the Spurs' top young players. They didn't get any of the Spurs' top draft picks. So I know the Kings wanted more, and they realized they probably couldn't get it because of the circumstances situation they were in. So a couple things that I thought were a little disingenuous by Monty McNair, but things that ultimately you can move on from.
Well, that's definitely a fair assessment behind that, Matt. When the trade first came out, we were like, okay, we're giving away a star caliber player. We don't get Stephon Castle back or any of these other players from San Antonio who can definitely come in and immediately make an impact. But the one player we did get, and you referenced this, was Zach LaVine.
Right.
He had his introductory press conference today here inside of Golden One Center in the press room. And needless to say, Zach is excited for this new opportunity, this new experience. He'd been in Chicago the last 7 years or 6 years. I lost track, but the last several years he had been in Chicago. So now he gets to come back to Sacramento, or I shouldn't say come back, technically, because he did sign a contract with Sacramento 6 years ago, or 7 years ago. Don't quote me on that. And Chicago was able to match it.
He was a restricted free agent.
Yeah, exactly. So technically he is kind of coming back to Sacramento, but obviously we know he was never here because Chicago matched that. But anyway, Zach gets to come here and he gets to reunite with one of his former teammates in Chicago with DeMar DeRozan, an acquisition that the Kings got over the summer. So you bring in these two strong players, and when I say two, respectively, DeRozan over the summer, LaVine now. Both of them are bucket getters.
Yep.
They're walking buckets. We've seen that with DeRozan this year. If you've been to any Kings game, you've seen that. But also Zach LaVine, he's averaging 24, 25, somewhere in that range. And is just, as we know, just a brilliant offensively. And I'm not even talking about his athleticism, his dunking, and all that other ability. We already know that he's a two-time slam dunk champion, two-time All-Star. So, you know, we know his credentials and what he brings to this team. But, Matt, it'll be interesting. And from listening to his presser, you know, he's excited to be here, but it'll be interesting to see how he fits in with this team. We know he's not going to fill De'Aaron Fox's role because Fox and him are two different players, but just how he's going to come in and fill that void, maybe that offensive void that De'Aaron Fox left.
Well, it was a very different feel of a press conference, that's for sure. After Monty kind of faced the firing squad, it was a welcome party for Zach LaVine in a lot of ways, right? And that's why I thought it was good to get that first press conference over with, because then you could turn the page to the future, right? And I thought Zach LaVine was very business oriented in the sense that he's ready to come here, he's ready to impact winning, very similar to what DeMar DeRozan was saying when he first signed here this offseason. They're here to win, right? Zach LaVine believes that they can win here, believes that they can be successful. He looks around, looks at this roster, his friend and former teammate DeMar DeRozan. He's playing with the best big man he's ever played with in Domantas Sabonis, and there's many who believe that two-man game is going to be really good. He's playing for Doug Christie, someone who's very familiar with from their time together in Seattle. They're both Seattle natives, so they have a good relationship too. So there's a lot here that LaVine's looking at and going, I can hit the ground running here. Right, and you talk about making up for De'Aaron Fox's role. Is he a primary ball handler? No, he's not. A lot of that responsibility is going to fall on Malik Monk. But he's a scorer. He's a bucket getter. He's not the defender that De'Aaron Fox is, and there are going to be some major questions when it comes to the Sacramento Kings on the defensive end. But what else is new? It's been that way for a long time. But offensively, you're talking to a guy that averages 1 point fewer per game than De'Aaron Fox did on much more efficient shooting. And the one thing that jumps off the page, his three-point shooting. Three-point shooting has been horrendous for this Kings team this season, and it doesn't make sense why. Almost across the board, everybody down except for Keon Ellis and Domantas Sabonis having great three-point shooting years. Everybody else really, really struggling. You have Zach LaVine who's shooting 44% from three-point range, and historically, he's cooked the Kings in this building.
Oh, yeah.
I actually asked him about that, like, what is it about this building that made you shoot so well? And hopefully, him putting on the Kings jersey and being on the right side of things now, he'll continue to shoot as well as he did. So I think there's a lot of anticipation to see what he looks like tonight. And the good news is, with the way the Sacramento Kings want to play, it's not a very intense offense. That's one of the things Doug Christie did. He simplified things, right? Kings don't run a lot of plays. They play a free-flowing style off of each other. With someone like Domantas Sabonis, who's going to want to get him the ball where he wants it. With someone like Malik Monk, who is a pass-first guard as well, in addition to a great scorer, I think Zach LaVine's going to have no problem fitting right in offensively with this Kings team.
Absolutely, and one of the things that LaVine did also say in his presser is that he's looking forward to lighting the beam.
Yes.
And that's something he wants to do. So, he definitely wants to win, especially at his career. I believe he's 29, if I'm not mistaken, somewhere around there. So he's at that age where it's like, okay,
he's in his prime.
He's in his prime, yeah. And it's time to start playing, it's time to go to a winning organization and play winning basketball. And as everyone who wants to be here obviously wants to win. That's why you play the game. Last thing, Matt, I wanted to touch on before we wrap this up is, it's funny, earlier in Monty McNair's press conference when he was facing the firing squad, one of the questions was, what is he going to do to address the needs of length, size, especially in a Western Conference where you're going up against a lot of length and size.
It's been an issue for the Kings for over 2 years.
Yeah, absolutely. Just watch the one team the Kings lost to 6 times last year, the New Orleans Pelicans, and figure out what happened with the size and length. And maybe, just maybe, that was the reason that this team did not get past the play-in last year. Anyway, that's besides the fact. But the reason I bring that up, Matt, is because no more than maybe 30 minutes after Zach LaVine's presser or whatnot, it was announced that indeed the Kings did acquire some size and length. They got 7'1" big man Jonas Valanciunas, who will be coming to Sacramento. He's not making his debut tonight. He still has to figure some things out, but they go out and get this guy. And just a heck of a player. He's a rim protector. He's somebody who can clog the paint, somebody that can be a strong force in there. Pairing him with Domantas, that's definitely a front court that should give opposing teams nightmares, if you ask me.
So there's a lot of things in there that you said that all blend together. First and foremost, you mentioned losing to the Pelicans 6 times last season. Jonas Valanciunas was the starting center for the Pelicans last season that you lost to 6 times. So the Kings are very familiar with him, and I think Domantas Sabonis is really excited to play with him instead of against him like he has last season. Speaking of Domantas Sabonis, Valanciunas and Sabonis, international teammates for Lithuania. They have come up together. In fact, Valanciunas in many ways was a veteran and a leader for Sabonis in his younger years. So these two are very familiar with each other. Jonas Valanciunas is coming in to be a backup for Sabonis. This is a big deal because Sabonis no longer has to play 38 to 40 minutes a night, right? You can rest him 12, 13, 14 minutes, which is important if you plan on competing for a playoff spot and playing more than 82 games a year. And Sabonis, as we know, already gets beat up a lot when he plays. Having someone to be able to fill those minutes effectively to give Sabonis that rest is really good. But I have talked to some people within the Kings organization that do believe that there is a possibility of Sabonis and Valanciunas actually working together. There is a belief that they could share the floor together. You're not going to see it in any kind of starting lineup scenario, but you might see minutes where Sabonis and Valanciunas are on the floor at the same time. Talk about great rebounding. You talk about good paint defense and just physical presence. Yeah. That would be really good. Offensively, there's some concerns about how you score, how you defend the perimeter, how you shoot, although Sabonis is shooting 47% from three-point range this season.
Which, by the way, is one of the best in the league right now.
I'm a little skeptical if it'll work or not, but we're going to get a chance to see it. It's a legitimate NBA caliber rotational player. This Kings team has desperately needed depth. They get a lot of it in Valanciunas. I've been very critical of this front office this season. this is a really good move for this front office.
And I got to say, Matt, you haven't been the only one who's critical of this front office. I think if you ever pay attention to Kings Twitter, you'll see a lot of them echo those same sentiments because at the end of the day, this is a results league. You got to get results.
Yep.
Trade deadline, what have you, and that's something, if you remember last trade deadline, we didn't really get results on anything. So at least we see the results coming in now. Matt, as we wrap this up, you get the acquisition of Zach LaVine. You get the acquisition of Valanciunas. Obviously, De'Aaron departs, but now looking at this team, do you feel that they have the right pieces to make that push in a crowded Western Conference to be a playoff team, meaning seeds 1 through 6?
I think they're close, and I know they're not done. I know they're still trying to work. I don't know if they're going to actually get one more trade done before now and the trade deadline on February 6th, tomorrow at noon. So we'll see if the Kings can figure anything else out before that deadline actually hits. But I know for a fact they are looking for some help on the wing. They're looking for some taller wings and forwards that can help shoot the rock and space the floor a little bit. So they are keeping an eye out for potential pieces like that. We'll see if they can close any of those deals. But even so, they've upgraded this roster in the sense of depth, like we talked about with Valanciunas. Will they be able to overcome and survive and improve upon the absence of their franchise player in De'Aaron Fox? That's yet to be seen. Offensively, I think absolutely yes, they could do it. Defensively, I need to see it a little bit first. So they have the talent to compete. Will they actually compete? Will it work? That's a completely different story, but now we get to go along for the ride.
And I love that you say that because a lot of times on paper you can look at something and say, oh, this works, this may look good, but the eye test, putting them to play, seeing that chemistry and how it works on the court is a whole other story. The good news is we get an opportunity to check that out tonight when the Kings host the Orlando Magic here at 7 o'clock. Now, you heard him say the Kings may not be done when it comes to trade deadline and stuff. Well, Matt George is never done when it comes to the Kings talk. You can find him on Locked On Kings podcast. I think he already did 7 episodes just today alone.
I don't know. So, maybe. It's all a blur at this point.
It is, but of course, you know where to go for more content. The Locked On Kings app. You can see it on ABC 10 Plus or on the Locked On Kings page. Be sure to support that. And Matt and I look forward to bringing you a full recap of this game tonight on ABC 10 here at 11 o'clock. With that being said, from Gordon One Center, I'm Kevin John. That is Matt George. Thank you for tuning in. Be sure to join us on all of our digital platforms on ABC 10.
Light the beam.